At dinner, his ex looked straight at him and said, "I can give you a baby if you want, because your wife can't." The table went silent. He turned to her, expecting tears or an outburst, but she simply smiled, leaned closer, and whispered, "Follow your heart." That night she didn't cry or argue. She just walked away in silence, leaving him to drown in his own guilt. The next morning she called her lawyer. What happened after that? He can never forget. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your own family channel. May the Almighty bless every woman with peace that calms the storm, courage that never breaks, and love that lights the darkest nights. May your hearts bloom with kindness, your families stand strong, and your lives overflow with divine grace. You are the soul of every home, the reason love still lives in this world. But my family, why so much silence? It takes only 1 second to like, 1 heartbeat to comment, yet that single moment keeps this family alive. YouTube is trying to push us into shadows, but together we can rise again. Let's reach 1,000 likes on this story and prove that nothing can destroy our bond. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some moments split your life into before and after, and you never see them coming until they've already destroyed you. The restaurant flickered with amber candlelight, silverware heavy enough to feel expensive. Tyson Furland sat at the head of the table, his wife Grace Marie on his right. Their anniversary. She looked stunning in that deep blue dress that made her dark skin glow like carved mahogany. When she laughed at something his colleague said, Tyson felt that familiar warmth. He'd married someone far better than he deserved. The table was set for 8. His business associate and wife across from them. 2 other couples they'd known for years. Wine flowing, food exceptional. Grace savored her seared salmon with the focused appreciation she brought to everything. Then Natasha walked in. He saw her before Grace did. The hostess led her toward the back, and for one blissful second, Tyson thought she'd pass without incident. But Natasha possessed an uncanny ability to sense when she was being watched. Her eyes found his across the restaurant. She changed direction. "Tyson Furland. What are the chances?" Her voice was silk over steel. Suddenly she stood at their table, looking down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Red dress." "Of course red, Natasha." His voice came out carefully blank. "I didn't know you were back in town. Just flew in this morning." She gestured vaguely toward a table where a man sat looking uncomfortable. "Imagine running into you here. On your anniversary, no less." Grace's posture shifted beside him. Subtle, but he felt it. Her spine straightened. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass. She knew who Natasha was. "Won't you join us?" The words came from his colleague's wife. "We're celebrating. Any friend of Tyson's is welcome." The moment passed too quickly. Natasha was already pulling up a chair, settling between the couples. The waiter appeared with another setting. Grace said nothing, just watched with those dark eyes that saw everything. The conversation resumed. Weather. The menu. Someone's vacation. Natasha participated with practiced ease, charming everyone. She'd always been good at making people like her. He should have seen it coming. Should have recognized the way she steered conversation, the way she watched Grace with predatory focus. But he was distracted by wine, by relief that Grace seemed calm. Then someone mentioned children, his colleague's wife talking about her sister's new baby. Twins, sleepless nights, and endless joy. Harmless conversation. Grace's hand slipped from the table into her lap. A small movement, but Tyson recognized retreat. Natasha leaned forward. Candlelight caught the sharp angles of her face. "Speaking of babies," she said, voice dripping false sympathy. "Grace, honey, I heard about your struggles. That must be so difficult for you." The table went silent. Stunned silence of witnesses to something terrible. Grace's expression didn't change. She simply looked at Natasha with the kind of calm that comes before devastation. "I'm sorry." Grace's voice was quiet, controlled. "I don't believe we've met." "Oh, forgive me." Natasha's smile widened. "I'm Natasha. Tyson and I dated for 3 years before you two met. I just assumed he'd mention me." He had. Once briefly, I see. Grace's fingers found her napkin, folding it with precise movements. How lovely to finally put a face to the name. Natasha pressed forward. Anyway, I heard you've been having trouble conceiving. Such a shame. But I suppose some women's bodies just aren't built for it. The cruelty landed like a physical blow. Around the table, faces registered shock. His colleague coughed. Someone's fork clattered. Grace remained perfectly still. Tyson opened his mouth. No words came. I just want you to know, Natasha continued. If you two ever need help, I'd be happy to carry a baby for you. I have excellent genetics. I could give Tyson the child he's always wanted. Since you can't. The words hung in the air like poison. Every eye turned to Tyson. Grace turned to look at him too, and in her eyes he saw something that would haunt him forever. She was counting, waiting, giving him the chance to choose her. His mind raced. This was insane. He should tell Natasha to leave, should stand up for Grace, should make it crystal clear his ex-girlfriend had no place here, but another part of him, a small, dark part, was thinking about the attention, about Natasha still wanting him, about how it felt to be desired by two women at once. The ego stroke, the power. The seconds ticked by. 1, 2, 5, 10. Grace was still looking at him, still waiting. He could see her chest rising with carefully controlled breaths. Could see everything he was about to lose. 17 seconds. That's how long he stayed silent. 17 seconds of choosing his ego over his wife's dignity. Grace moved with the precision of an architect executing a perfect design. She set down her napkin, picked up her wine glass, drained it in 3 long swallows, set it down with a soft click that echoed through the silent restaurant. Then she turned to face him fully. Choose, she said, her voice steady as stone. Right now, her offer or our marriage, the words cut through his paralysis. Of course he'd choose Grace. This was ridiculous. He opened his mouth to say exactly that, but before the words could form, Grace stood. She didn't rush, didn't stumble, didn't cry or shout. She simply rose with the grace her mother had named her for, smoothed down her dress, and looked at him one final time. When she leaned close to whisper, he could smell her perfume. The same scent from their wedding day. Your silence just answered me. Then she walked away. Across the restaurant, past the startled hostess, out into the night. She didn't look back. Tyson sat frozen. The table erupted in awkward motion. His colleague threw money down, face twisted in disgust. Within moments, the table was empty, except for him and Natasha. She was smiling. Well, Natasha said, reaching for Grace's abandoned wine glass. I always knew you'd come back to me eventually. What did you just do? His voice came out strangled. I did you a favor. Natasha sipped the wine. She was holding you back. Now you're free. You just destroyed my marriage. I destroyed nothing you weren't already ready to walk away from. If you really loved her, you would have defended her. But you didn't. You sat there and thought about it. I saw you thinking, he wanted to argue. But somewhere deep down, he knew Natasha had read him perfectly. He'd enjoyed those 17 seconds. Enjoyed being wanted, enjoyed the choice, and that enjoyment had cost him everything. The drive home was endless. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly, his knuckles went white. The house was dark when he arrived. Grace's car sat in the driveway. Maybe they could talk. The front door was unlocked. He called her name, no answer. Everything looked normal. Their wedding photo above the mantel. But something had changed. He could feel it. He found her in their bedroom, packing a small overnight bag with mechanical efficiency. Grace. She didn't look up. Just continued folding clothes. Grace, please. Let me explain. Explain what? Her voice was conversational. Explain why you couldn't defend me? Why 17 seconds passed before you remembered you had a wife? You were counting? Of course I was counting. She zipped the bag closed, finally meeting his eyes. What else was I supposed to do while I watched my husband decide whether I was worth fighting for? I wasn't deciding anything. I was just shocked. You knew exactly what to say. Grace picked up her bag. You chose not to say it. There's a difference. She walked past him. He reached for her arm, desperate, and she stopped. But when she looked at where his hand touched her, her expression was so cold that he dropped his grip. "Don't," she said. "Don't touch me like you have the right to keep me here. You're my wife. I was your wife. Past tense. The moment you stayed silent, you ended this marriage. I'm just making it official." She headed for the stairs. He followed. "Where are you going?" "We can work through this." She paused at the bottom, hand on the banister. When she turned, her eyes were completely dry. "I'm staying with a friend tonight. Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer. You'll be served with papers at your office. Don't fight the terms. Just sign them and let me go." "I'm not letting you go. You already did." Grace shifted her bag. "You let me go when you sat there and counted the value of another woman's attention against your wife's dignity. And you chose wrong." The door opened, closed, her car starting, gravel crunching. Taillights fading, then silence. Tyson sank onto the top step and stared at his hands. These hands that hadn't defended his wife, that had just let her walk away twice in one night. He pulled out his phone and stared at Grace's contact photo. Her smiling face from their honeymoon. He started to call, stopped. What would he even say? The truth was too ugly. That he'd liked the attention. That for 17 seconds he'd felt powerful and desired. That his ego had mattered more than her heart. He couldn't say that. Couldn't admit what it meant about who he really was. So he sat on the stairs in his empty house and waited for morning. Waited for consequences. Waited for the moment when he'd have to face what his silence had destroyed. And across town, Grace Marie unpacked in a friend's spare room, took off the emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother, and placed it on the nightstand. She lay in a bed that wasn't hers, staring at a ceiling she didn't recognize, and felt nothing. No tears, no rage, just a vast, echoing emptiness where her marriage used to be. And somewhere in that emptiness, a single thought crystallized. She would never again make herself small for a man who didn't know how to protect what he had. The silence had spoken louder than any words could have, and she'd finally heard what it was saying. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Became Untouchable. Morning came with all the mercy of a blade. Tyson woke on the couch, neck cramped, mouth tasting like whiskey. Sunlight streamed through windows Grace usually kept curtained. She'd always managed such things. The rhythm of their home. His phone showed 15 missed calls. His mother, Delilah. His sister, Simone. His colleague. And nothing from Grace. He tried calling her. The phone rang once, then went to voicemail. She'd blocked him. Less than 12 hours, and she'd already erased his access. The house felt wrong. Coffee mugs they'd bought together. Her reading glasses on a magazine. Everything exactly where it had been, yet completely foreign. When he arrived at the office, his colleague was waiting. The man whose wife was Grace's closest friend. "We need to talk." The conference room door closed. "I'm out." His colleague placed a folder on the table. "You can buy my share or I'll sell to someone else. Either way, I'm done. You're ending our partnership over dinner? I'm ending it over you sitting there like a coward while your ex-girlfriend verbally assaulted your wife." The man's jaw was tight. "My wife is Grace's best friend. You think I can look her in the eye and tell her I'm still working with you?" It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. The folder slid across. "Sign them, or I'll make this messy." Tyson signed without reading. "Take it. For what it's worth, I liked you. Thought you were solid. But Grace deserves a man who doesn't need 17 seconds to decide if his wife is worth defending." After he left, Tyson sat alone. Partnership ended. Friendship severed. And it had only been 16 hours. His assistant knocked. She set an envelope on the table without meeting his eyes. This was just delivered. Urgent. Divorce papers. Grace hadn't been exaggerating. Somehow she'd managed to have papers drawn up and delivered before lunch. The terms were brutal. She wanted the house. The one his grandfather had built. She wanted half their assets. She wanted him to pay her attorney's fees, but the cruelest term was buried in the middle. She requested return of his grandmother's emerald ring, not to keep, but to donate to charity auction, benefiting fertility research. She was turning the family heirloom into a public statement. He signed everything. Without argument. If Grace wanted to take everything, let her. The assistant came back. She still wouldn't look at him. "Karen," he stopped her. "Did I offend you?" She turned, and for the first time she looked him in the eye with something close to contempt. "You sat there and let that woman humiliate your wife. Everyone's talking about it. By now everyone downtown knows. You're that guy, the one who couldn't defend his own wife." His phone rang. His mother. "I taught you to be better than this. No hello. Just immediate disappointment. I raised a son who was supposed to protect his wife. What happened to that man?" "Mom, I know. Grace called me this morning." From her lawyer's office. She didn't come for comfort. She called to tell me she was filing for divorce and hoped it wouldn't affect my relationship with her. She was worried about hurting me while getting divorced from my own son. "I'm fixing this." "You can't fix this. You broke something that can't be repaired. That woman endured years trying to give you a family. Years of treatments and procedures. She never complained, never made you feel inadequate. And you let your ex-girlfriend mock her for it. I didn't know about the treatments. The silence was worse than shouting. You didn't know. Your wife was going through hell and you didn't know." "That's worse, Tyson." She hung up. His father called next. 8 seconds. "Disappointed doesn't begin to cover what I'm feeling. Don't call this house until you've made this right." Click. Simone sent a text. "Sunday dinner. Grace is coming. You're not invited." He was being excised from his own family. Days blurred. Coffee tasted like nothing. Sleep came in fractured pieces. 3 clients called to end contracts. They'd heard about his situation. It reflected poorly on their values. They'd take business elsewhere, to Grace's firm. Grace's firm was expanding while his contracted. He drove past the house one evening. Lights were on. Through the window, Grace moved through the kitchen. She looked fine. Better than fine. She looked free. Grace wasn't falling apart. She was just living, moving forward, existing without him, as if the amputation had been necessary surgery. A car pulled up behind his, a police cruiser. "Sir, I need you to move along." The homeowner called in a suspicious vehicle. Grace had called the police on him. He drove away, alone on dark streets. His phone buzzed. An email from a business journal. "Local architect wins major downtown development contract." The article featured Grace's photo, confident smile, eyes looking into whatever future she was building. The contract was massive. Grace had beaten out 7 other firms. It mentioned she was recently divorced. "Recent life changes have only sharpened her focus," Grace was quoted. "Sometimes you need to remove dead weight to reach new heights." Dead weight. He read those 2 words over and over. His wife had just publicly referred to their marriage as dead weight, because it was true. He'd been dead weight, consuming her energy and time and love without reciprocation. She'd been carrying him, and he'd never noticed the burden. Over following weeks, the pattern repeated. Grace won another contract, then another. Her face appeared everywhere, magazines, local news, charity events as she cut her hair. The long waves were gone, replaced by a sharp cut that made her look powerful and untouchable. She wore bold colors now, reds and purples that demanded attention. The Grace he'd known had been softer, accommodating. The Grace in these photos looked forged in fire. He barely recognized her. Worse, he suspected the woman he'd married had never really existed, that Grace had been a performance. Now that he was gone, she'd finally become who she actually was. Someone extraordinary. His assistant quit via email. She couldn't continue working for someone whose personal conduct conflicted with her values. She was taking a position at Grace's firm. Even his employees were choosing her. The house sold quickly. Grace didn't attend the closing, but she sent one message through the attorney. "Tell him I hope the next woman he loves never has to count seconds." He moved into an apartment, smaller, cheaper, the kind of place you went when starting over or admitting defeat. His new view overlooked a parking lot and a dumpster. No more garden, no more waking to Grace's coffee brewing and her humming softly. just blank walls and borrowed furniture, and echoing silence. He saw Grace one more time before the divorce was finalized. Across a courtroom, the judge read through terms. Grace signed with steady hands. She didn't look at Tyson once. When the judge declared their marriage officially ended, she stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked out with her head high. Tyson sat in the courtroom long after everyone left. He walked out into afternoon sunshine that felt like mockery. The day was beautiful, clear skies. But all Tyson felt was the enormous weight of permanent endings. Grace was free. Free from him, free from their marriage, free from whatever burden he'd been. And she was thriving in that freedom, while he drowned in the rubble of everything his silence had destroyed. Chapter 3. The Family Who Chose Her. Sunday dinner had been a Furland family tradition for as long as Tyson could remember. Every week without fail, his mother Delilah would set the table for the whole family. The house would fill with the smell of her cooking, laughter echoing through rooms that had witnessed generations of gatherings. He wasn't invited this week. Tyson knew this because Simone had made it explicitly clear. But knowing you're excluded and accepting it are two different things entirely. He found himself driving past his childhood home anyway, some masochistic need to see what he was missing. The driveway was full. His father's truck, Simone's car, his brother Garrett's vehicle, and Grace's sleek sedan parked right up front like she belonged there more than he did. Through the large bay window, he could see movement, shapes passing back and forth. The dining room light was on, casting warm golden light that made the scene look like a painting of everything he'd lost. He should drive away, should give them space, should respect the boundary his family had drawn, but his hands wouldn't turn the wheel. He sat across the street, engine idling, watching his own family gather without him. The front door opened. Grace stepped out onto the porch, laughing at something someone inside had said. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a soft sweater that made her look relaxed in a way she rarely had during their marriage. Her new, shorter hair caught the porch light. She looked radiant. She looked home. His mother appeared behind her, wrapping a shawl around Grace's shoulders against the evening chill. The gesture was so maternal, so protective, that Tyson felt something crack inside his chest. Delilah had never been an overly affectionate woman. But with Grace, she was tender in ways she'd never been with her own children. Grace hugged his mother. Not a quick, obligatory hug, but a real embrace that lasted. When they pulled apart, he could see his mother's hand come up to cup Grace's cheek, the kind of gesture reserved for beloved daughters. They went back inside. The door closed, and Tyson sat in his car, understanding that he hadn't just lost his wife. He'd lost his entire family to her. His phone rang, a known number. He almost didn't answer. "Stop sitting outside the house like a stalker." Garrett's voice was cold. "Mom saw your car. You're upsetting her. Leave. I just wanted to. I don't care what you wanted." Grace is inside helping Mom cook. Dad's showing her his new workshop project. Simone's asking her advice about renovation plans. "We're having a family dinner, and you're not part of it right now. So leave before I come out there and make you leave." The line went dead. Tyson drove away, hands shaking on the wheel. His brother had never spoken to him like that. Garrett had always been the peacekeeper, the diplomatic one who smoothed over family conflicts. But there had been no diplomacy in that call, just cold dismissal. He ended up at a bar. The kind of place where no one knew him, where he could sit in a dark corner and drink until the edges of his pain softened. The bartender poured whiskey without judgment. The other patrons ignored him completely. His phone buzzed. A message from Simone, not to him, but a group text he was apparently still part of. A photo. Grace and their mother in the kitchen, flour on their faces, laughing while rolling out dough for something. The caption read, "Best cooking partner ever." The responses flooded in. Garrett, "Grace makes better pie than you ever did, Mom." His father, Warren, "Smart and can cook." Tyson's an idiot. Simone, "She's teaching me her pasta recipe next week." Each message was a knife. Each one made it clear that Grace had integrated so deeply into his family that removing her would tear them apart. She'd become the glue holding them together, and he was the crack they'd had to seal over. Another photo. This one of Grace and Warren in his workshop. She was wearing safety goggles, holding some piece of wood while his father guided her hands on a saw. Warren was smiling, actually smiling. His father, who rarely showed emotion, looked genuinely happy teaching Grace woodworking. Tyson remembered asking his father to teach him that same skill years ago. Warren had been too busy, too tired, not in the mood. But for Grace, he had time. For Grace, he had patience. The bartender refilled his glass without being asked. Rough night? Rough life. Woman trouble. I had a woman. I just didn't know what I had until I didn't have her anymore. The bartender nodded like he'd heard that story 1,000 times. They always figure out their worth eventually. Question is whether we figure it out in time. I didn't. Then you live with it. That's all you can do. Tyson drank until the bar closed, stumbled to a cab, made it home to his empty apartment where no one was waiting. No one cared if he made it back safely. No one would notice if he didn't show up tomorrow. The next morning brought a massive hangover and a message from his mother. Not a text, a voicemail. He almost deleted it without listening, but something made him press play. I'm disappointed in you, and that's not something I say lightly. Delilah's voice was measured, controlled, which somehow made it worse. Grace sat at my kitchen table last night and told me about the fertility treatments. 4 years, Tyson. 4 years of hormone injections twice daily. She showed me the bruises on her stomach from the needles. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your wife had bruises all over her body from trying to give you a child, and you never noticed. His mother's voice cracked slightly. She lost 3 pregnancies. 3. She grieved alone because she didn't want you to feel like a failure. She protected you from pain while she bled and cried and went through hell. And you sat at that restaurant and let your ex-girlfriend mock her for it. The silence on the recording stretched so long, he thought she'd hung up. Then she's not just my daughter-in-law anymore. She's my daughter, period. The paperwork might say you're divorced, but I'm not divorcing her. So you need to understand something very clearly. When you hurt her, you hurt me. When you humiliated her, you humiliated this entire family. And until you can look me in the eye and prove you understand the magnitude of what you destroyed, you're not welcome in my home. The voicemail ended. Tyson sat on his couch and replayed it 3 times. Each time the words hit harder. His mother had essentially disowned him, chosen Grace over her own son. And the worst part was, he couldn't even argue with her logic. He'd known Grace was struggling with fertility. He'd known they'd been trying for years without success. But he'd never asked the hard questions. Never inquired about what she was doing to address it. Never offered to go to appointments or hold her hand through procedures. He'd just assumed it would happen eventually, and when it didn't, he'd felt vaguely disappointed, but never pursued it further, because pursuing it would have required acknowledging his own potential role in their inability to conceive. It would have required vulnerability and shared burden. It was easier to let Grace handle it quietly while he remained blissfully ignorant. His phone rang. His father. Tyson hesitated, then answered. Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Warren's voice was gruff. When your mother got sick, do you remember who sat with me in that hospital waiting room all night? Tyson remembered. His mother had emergency surgery. He'd been there, but he'd left around midnight to get some sleep. Grace stayed, Warren continued. She sat with me for 8 hours. Didn't complain, didn't ask to leave. Just sat there and kept me company while I waited to hear if my wife would survive. She brought me coffee, made me eat, kept me sane. And when your mother came out of surgery, Grace was the first person she asked for. Not you, not Garrett, not Simone, Grace. Dad, I said don't interrupt. After that, your mother started calling Grace every day. They became close in a way that had nothing to do with you. Grace helped her through recovery, came over to cook meals, helped her shower when she couldn't do it herself. She did all the things a daughter would do, the things Simone couldn't do because she lives too far away. Warren paused. So when you ask yourself why we're choosing her over you, understand it's not really a choice. She earned her place in this family through years of showing up, of being there, of caring about us as people rather than obligations. You're our son and we love you, but love doesn't mean we have to approve of who you've become. Love means telling you that you need to be better. And right now you're not even close to the man we raised. I'm trying to fix this. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're just drowning in self-pity. Grace isn't sitting around crying over you. She's living her life, building her career, maintaining her relationships. She's moving forward while you're stuck. That should tell you something about the difference between the two of you. What do you want me to do? I want you to become a man worthy of the family you were born into. I want you to understand that Grace didn't leave you because she stopped loving you. She left because you gave her no choice. And until you understand that distinction, there's nothing to talk about. Warren hung up. Tyson sat in his apartment and stared at the walls. His family had formed a united front against him, and at the center of that front was the woman he'd failed to protect. Grace had become more Furland than he was, and he'd given her that position through his own negligence. He thought about showing up at the next Sunday dinner uninvited, forcing a confrontation, demanding they choose between him and Grace. But even as the thought formed, he knew how that would end. They would choose her, every single time, because she'd earned it and he'd squandered it. His phone buzzed. An email notification. Grace's foundation was hosting a fundraising gala. The invitation was public, sent to a mailing list he must have been on from some previous event. The gala promised to raise money for women struggling with fertility treatments, providing financial assistance to those who couldn't afford the costs. Grace had turned her private pain into public purpose. She'd taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into something that would help countless other women. While he sat in his apartment drinking whiskey and feeling sorry for himself, she was out in the world, making a difference. The gala was in 2 weeks. Black tie. 500 expected attendees, major donors including several names he recognized. And there, listed among the sponsors, was Furland Family Foundation, established by Delilah and Warren Furland. His parents were financially supporting Grace's charity. They'd started a foundation in their family name to help fund her mission. The foundation that bore his name, but existed to support his ex-wife's vision. The irony was suffocating. Tyson looked at the invitation and knew he wouldn't attend. He wasn't welcome there. Grace had built something beautiful from the rubble of their marriage, and his presence would only contaminate it with reminders of how she'd suffered. So he sat alone in his apartment while his family gathered around the woman he'd lost, and he understood with terrible clarity that some betrayals can never be forgiven. Some silences echo forever. Some choices once made define you for the rest of your life. He'd chosen silence when he should have roared, and now he was paying for it in the currency of permanent exile. Chapter 4. The Man Who Lost Everything But Learned Nothing Yet. Therapy was supposed to help. That's what everyone kept telling him. Get professional help. Talk to someone. Process your feelings. Tyson had resisted for weeks, but eventually the weight of his isolation became unbearable enough that he made the appointment. The therapist's office was aggressively neutral. Beige walls, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues positioned strategically on the side table. Dr. Brennan was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a notepad she barely used. "Tell me why you're here," she said, settling into her chair with the ease of someone who'd heard every story imaginable. "My wife left me. I need to figure out how to get her back." Dr. Brennan tilted her head slightly. "Is that why you're here? To develop a strategy for reconciliation? Isn't that what therapy is for? To help me fix my problems? Therapy is for helping you understand yourself. Whether that leads to reconciliation with your ex-wife is secondary to the primary work of examining who you are and why you make the choices you make." Tyson shifted in his seat. "I made a mistake. I stayed silent when I should have defended her. I just need to prove to her that I've changed, that I won't make that mistake again. Tell me about the silence. So he did. He explained the dinner, Natasha's appearance, the cruel offer, the 17 seconds that destroyed his marriage. As he talked, Dr. Brennan listened without judgment, without interruption, just letting him pour out the story in all its ugly detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Then why did you stay silent?" I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. It all happened so fast. 17 seconds isn't fast. 17 seconds is an eternity when someone you love is waiting for you to defend them. So I'll ask again, and this time I want you to really think about the answer. Why did you stay silent? Tyson opened his mouth to repeat his explanation. But something about Dr. Brennan's steady gaze made the practiced words die in his throat. She wasn't going to accept easy answers. She wanted truth, and truth was the one thing he'd been avoiding since that night. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Yes, you do. You just don't want to say it out loud, because saying it makes it real. But we're going to sit here until you tell me the truth, because until you acknowledge it, we can't work on changing it." The clock on the wall ticked. Tyson counted 15 seconds before he could force the words out. I liked it. The attention. Having two women want me. For those 17 seconds, I felt powerful. There it is. Dr. Brennan made a note. That's the truth we're working with. You enjoyed your ex-girlfriend's attention enough that you sacrificed your wife's dignity for it. Now tell me what that says about you. That I'm selfish. Go deeper. That I need external validation to feel good about myself. Deeper still. Tyson struggled. The words felt like they were being dragged out of him with hooks. That I didn't value my wife the way I should have. That I took her for granted. That her steadiness made me complacent, and when someone offered me excitement, I was tempted by it. Better. Now we're getting somewhere. Dr. Brennan leaned forward. Here's what I'm hearing. You married a woman who was constant, reliable, who loved you unconditionally, and that consistency made you lazy. You stopped trying because you didn't think you had to. You assumed she'd always be there, so you stopped earning her presence. And when an ex-girlfriend showed up offering drama and attention and ego strokes, part of you responded to that because it was new and exciting and made you feel desired in a way your wife no longer did. Not because your wife stopped desiring you, but because you'd stopped noticing her desire. Every word landed like a physical blow. Tyson wanted to argue, to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't that simple. But it was exactly that simple. So how do I fix it? He asked. That's the wrong question. The right question is, how do you become a person who wouldn't make that mistake again? And the answer isn't about winning your wife back. It's about fundamental change in how you see yourself and others. I don't understand the difference. If you change to win her back, you're still making it about what you want. You're still centered on your needs, your desires, your redemption arc. Real change means altering who you are at your core, independent of whether it benefits you. It means becoming a better person because that's who you should be, not because it might earn you rewards. Tyson left the session feeling worse than when he'd arrived. He'd hoped for strategies, for concrete steps he could take to prove himself to Grace. Instead, he'd gotten philosophy and uncomfortable truths about his character. But he kept going back, week after week. Slowly, painfully, Dr. Brennan helped him excavate the layers of ego and entitlement he'd built up over years of taking Grace for granted. In their 5th session, she asked him about Grace's daily life during their marriage. What did she do in the mornings? She made coffee and reviewed project plans at the kitchen table. Did you ever sit with her? Ask about the projects? Show interest in her work? Tyson thought back. Sometimes. When I had time. And when you didn't have time, what did you do? I get my coffee and head to my office to check emails. So Grace would be at the table, engaged in her passion, and you'd take the coffee she made and leave her sitting alone. I had work to do. So did she. But she made time to make your coffee, to be present in the morning, to start the day together. You took the coffee and the presents and gave nothing back. The realization hit hard. I never thought about it that way. That's the problem. You never thought about it at all. You consumed her care without reciprocation. And when that pattern repeats for years, when someone gives and gives while the other person takes and takes, eventually the giver realizes they're being drained. They start to understand that they're not in a partnership. They're in servitude. Grace never said anything. Of course she didn't, because she loved you, because she hoped you'd notice, because she didn't want to nag or demand or make herself seem difficult. So she stayed quiet and kept giving, and you stayed oblivious and kept taking, until the balance became so skewed that one public humiliation was enough to topple the whole structure. Tyson started paying attention to Grace from a distance, not stalking but observing. He saw her at a coffee shop one morning, sitting with her laptop working on something that made her smile. She looked content, focused, free. A man approached her table, tall, confident, carrying 2 coffee cups. He set one in front of Grace, and she looked up with surprise and then pleasure. They talked. She laughed at something he said. The conversation was easy, natural, the kind of interaction between people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Tyson felt jealousy surge through him. Who was this man? What gave him the right to bring Grace coffee, to make her laugh, to occupy space in her life that used to belong to Tyson? He brought it up in therapy. I saw her with someone. Another man. They looked comfortable together. And how did that make you feel? Angry, jealous, like I wanted to go over there and tell him she's mine, but she's not yours. You divorced her. She's free to see whoever she wants. I know that intellectually, but emotionally it's different. Tell me something, Dr. Brennan said. When you were married and Grace was sitting at that kitchen table every morning, did you feel grateful for her presence? I suppose I did. Did you tell her? Tyson was silent. Did you ever wake up and look at your wife and think about how lucky you were that she chose you? Did you ever thank her for the 1,000 small things she did to make your life easier? Did you ever make her feel valued in the way you're demanding she value you now? No. So you took her for granted when you had her, and now that someone else might appreciate what you wasted, suddenly you remember her worth. That's not love. That's possessiveness. That's ego. The words stung because they were true. Tyson had never fully appreciated Grace until the threat of losing her became real. And even then, it had taken actually losing her for him to understand what he'd had. What do I do? He asked, and this time it wasn't about strategy. It was genuine helplessness. You let her go. You stop thinking about her as something to win back and start thinking about who you need to become. You do the work. You change yourself. And maybe, eventually, you become someone worthy of a second chance. Or maybe you don't get a second chance, but at least you don't make the same mistakes with the next person. Either way, the work is the same. I don't want someone else. I want Grace. Then prove it, not to her, to yourself. Become the man she deserved. Do it whether she ever knows or cares. Do it because it's right. Tyson left that session understanding that healing wasn't going to be quick or easy or guaranteed to result in reconciliation. He was facing fundamental reconstruction of who he was, and there was no timeline, no finish line, no moment where he could declare himself fixed and demand Grace notice. He started small. He cleaned his apartment, not just surface cleaning, but deep, thorough, making his space livable rather than just survivable. He started cooking real meals instead of surviving on takeout. He joined a gym and started taking care of his body. He read books, real books, not just scrolling through his phone. He started showing up for himself in ways he'd never bothered to when Grace was doing all the emotional labor. But none of it felt like enough, because every small improvement just highlighted how far he'd fallen, how much he'd let himself become. And somewhere across town, Grace was building an empire while he was just trying to remember how to be a functional human being. The distance between them wasn't just physical, it was existential. She'd evolved beyond him, and he was still crawling through the wreckage, trying to find the pieces of the man he should have been all along. Chapter 5. The Truth That Broke Him Completely. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, just his mother's handwriting across the front. Inside was a USB drive and a note in Delilah's precise script. She gave me permission to show you this, not because she wants your pity, but because I need you to understand what you were too blind to see. Tyson stared at the drive for an hour before plugging it into his laptop. Part of him didn't want to know what was on it. Ignorance had been comfortable, but comfort was a luxury he'd forfeited the night he chose silence. The drive contained a single folder, medical records, Grace's name across the top of each document. He opened the first file, fertility treatment intake form. The date made his stomach drop. It was from years before that dinner. Years. Grace had been undergoing treatments for their entire marriage, and he'd never known. He read through the records with growing horror. Initial consultations, blood work, hormone panels showing imbalances, treatment plans outlining daily injections, medications with side effects that ranged from uncomfortable to debilitating. Grace had been taking drugs that made her nauseous, gave her headaches, caused mood swings and physical pain, and he'd never noticed. How was that possible? How had he lived with someone, shared a bed with them, eaten meals across from them, and never seen that they were suffering? The answer was shamefully simple. He'd never looked. He'd been so wrapped up in his own life, his own concerns, his own comfortable existence, that he'd never bothered to really see his wife. He clicked through more files. Procedure notes. Grace had undergone treatments that were invasive, painful, humiliating. She'd done this alone. No mention of a partner present. No support person listed. Just Grace, facing each appointment, each procedure, each disappointment by herself. Then he found the pregnancy records. 3 files, 3 different dates, each one documenting a pregnancy that Grace had lost. The first at 8 weeks. The medical notes were clinical, listing symptoms and treatment protocols. But Tyson could read between the lines. Grace had been pregnant with their child, had lost that child, and had never told him. The second loss at 10 weeks. The notes mentioned patient extremely distressed and recommended counseling. Grace had been falling apart, and he'd been oblivious. The third loss at 12 weeks. This one included an emergency room visit. Grace had been bleeding, in pain, scared enough to go to the hospital. And somehow she'd managed to hide this from him too. No, not hide. He'd just never bothered to ask. Never questioned why she seemed tired. Never noticed the way she sometimes held her stomach like it hurt. Never saw the grief in her eyes, because he'd never really looked at her eyes. Tyson felt bile rise in his throat. He barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. When there was nothing left, he sat on the cold tile floor and sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place he hadn't known existed. His wife had been in agony, physical, emotional, spiritual agony, and he'd been annoyed when she seemed distant, irritated when she wasn't in the mood for sex, impatient when she seemed distracted. He'd made her pain about his inconvenience. There were more files. Therapy notes from sessions Grace had attended alone. The therapist's observations were devastating. Patient continues to protect spouse from knowledge of her struggles. States she doesn't want him to feel inadequate or responsible. Patient taking full emotional burden of infertility, despite it being a shared medical issue. Shared medical issue. Meaning Tyson was part of the problem too. Grace had protected him from that knowledge, had shouldered all the blame, all the treatments, all the pain, because she didn't want him to feel like less of a man. He'd been given a gift he didn't deserve and hadn't even known to appreciate. The final file was dated 2 weeks before their anniversary dinner. Grace had scheduled one last treatment, a final attempt. The notes indicated this was her last chance, that she'd exhausted most viable options, that this procedure was essentially a Hail Mary. Then there was a cancellation note. Appointment cancelled due to patient experiencing extreme emotional distress. The date of cancellation was 2 days after their anniversary dinner. The stress from Natasha's public humiliation, from his silence, from the collapse of her marriage, had caused Grace to cancel her last chance at having the child she'd spent years trying to conceive. He hadn't just failed to defend her. He'd killed her hope. Tyson called his mother. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. "You saw them." "Not a question. Why didn't she tell me?" His voice was wrecked. "Why did she go through all of this alone?" "Because she loved you more than she loved herself. Because she was trying to protect you. Because she thought carrying the burden herself was what a good wife did." His mother's voice was hard. "She was wrong, but she believed it. And you never gave her reason to think differently." "I should have known." "Yes, you should have. A partner pays attention. A partner asks questions. A partner notices when the person they love is suffering. You did none of those things. How do I fix this?" "You can't. That's what you need to understand. This isn't something you can fix with apologies or grand gestures." Grace went through years of hell while you sleepwalked through your marriage. She protected you from her pain, and you responded by letting another woman mock her for it. There's no fixing that. There's only living with what you did and becoming someone who would never do it again. She'll never forgive me. Probably not. But that's not the point. The point is whether you can forgive yourself, whether you can look in the mirror and recognize the man who was too self-absorbed to notice his wife was drowning. Delilah paused. "Grace told me something before she gave me permission to show you those records. She said she wanted you to know not because she needed your guilt or your pity, but because she needed you to understand why she'll never come back. She said you needed to see exactly what your silence cost her. Not just the marriage, not just the dignity, but years of suffering you never acknowledged. Dreams you never helped her carry, pain you never tried to ease. I don't know how to live with this. You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, it's not Grace's problem anymore. She's free, and you need to let her stay free." His mother hung up. Tyson sat in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of his wife's secret anguish, and he understood with brutal clarity that he'd been married to a stranger. Not because Grace had hidden who she was, but because he'd never bothered to ask. He'd loved the idea of her, the convenience of her, the comfort of having someone who made his life easier. But he'd never loved her enough to really see her, and now she was gone. Really truly gone. Not just physically absent, but emotionally unreachable. The Grace who had protected him, who had loved him enough to suffer in silence, who had believed their marriage was worth preserving at any cost, that woman no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone harder, someone who'd learned that protecting others at the expense of yourself wasn't love. It was self-destruction, and Grace had chosen to stop destroying herself. He couldn't blame her. He could only mourn the man he should have been and wasn't. Tyson looked at the medical records spread across his coffee table and knew he had two choices. He could let this knowledge destroy him, could drown in guilt and self-pity and rage at his own inadequacy, or he could use it as fuel to become someone different. Not for Grace. She was done with him and he needed to accept that. But for himself, for whatever came next. For the possibility that maybe somewhere down the road he could be the kind of man who noticed when someone he loved was suffering, who asked the hard questions, who carried burdens instead of creating them. It was a small hope, but it was all he had left. Chapter 6. The Revenge of a Woman Who Didn't Need It. The gala was everything Grace had envisioned and more. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, tables set with elegant arrangements, 500 guests dressed in their finest. The Voices, that Carrie Foundation's inaugural fundraising event, had transformed from dream to reality, and Grace stood at the center of it, radiant in a gown the color of deep wine. Tyson watched from his apartment. He'd known better than to attend, but the local news was covering the event live. There she was, his ex-wife, giving interviews about the foundation's mission, thanking donors, explaining the desperate need for accessible fertility treatments. "Too many women suffer in silence," Grace told the reporter, her voice steady and clear. "They blame themselves. They hide their pain. They protect everyone around them while they're falling apart inside. This foundation exists to tell them they don't have to be silent anymore, that their struggle is valid, that they deserve support, not shame." The reporter asked if this was inspired by personal experience. Grace smiled, and Tyson recognized that smile. It was the one she used when she was being gracious while refusing to engage with pain. "Everything I build now is built from what I survived. And I survived because I finally chose myself." The camera panned across the room. Tyson spotted his parents at a prominent table. His mother wore the dress she saved for special occasions. His father in a suit that actually fit. Simone was there with her husband. Garrett with his partner. The entire Furland family had turned out to support Grace's foundation. They were all there, everyone except him. A man appeared on screen, walking up to Grace with 2 champagne flutes. He handed her one, said something that made her laugh, then placed his hand on the small of her back with casual intimacy. The man from the coffee shop. He was here, at her event, acting like he belonged at her side. The jealousy that surged through Tyson was irrational and overwhelming. He wanted to throw something at the television, wanted to call Grace and demand to know who this man was, wanted to show up at the gala and reclaim what he'd lost. But he'd lost the right to claim anything where Grace was concerned. She wasn't his anymore. She'd never really been his, he was realizing. She'd been her own person who'd chosen to share her life with him, and he'd mistaken that gift for ownership. The gala raised $750,000. The news anchor announced it with barely concealed amazement. In one night, Grace's foundation had secured enough funding to help hundreds of women access treatments they couldn't otherwise afford. She'd turned her private devastation into public good. She'd weaponized her pain and used it to help others. While Tyson was still figuring out how to get through a day without drowning in self-pity, Grace was literally changing lives. The next day, articles appeared in every major outlet. Local architect launches foundation to support women through fertility struggles. The stories all featured the same photo. Grace in her wine-colored gown, radiant and powerful, looking nothing like a woman whose marriage had imploded a year ago. The articles mentioned the gala's success, the foundation's mission, the impressive donor list. Some mentioned Grace's recent divorce in passing, framing it as an obstacle she'd overcome rather than a failure. The narrative had shifted. Grace wasn't a victim of a failed marriage. She was a survivor who'd transformed trauma into purpose. And Tyson? He wasn't mentioned at all. He'd become a footnote Grace had erased from her story. His phone rang. Dr. Brennan, his therapist. They didn't have a session scheduled. "I saw the news coverage of the gala," she said without preamble. "How are you handling it?" "I don't know." "Angry, jealous, proud, all of it at once?" "That's normal. You're watching someone you love succeed in ways you never imagined possible, and you're not part of that success. That's difficult." There was a man with her at the event. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there. "And that bothers you?" "Of course it bothers me. Some stranger gets to be there for her success while I'm sitting in my apartment watching it on television." He's not a stranger to her. And more importantly, you're not entitled to be there just because you were married. You lost that privilege. Now you have to decide whether you're genuinely happy for her success or just upset that you're not benefiting from it. Tyson was quiet. He wanted to say he was happy for her, wanted to be the bigger person who could celebrate her achievements without making it about himself. But the truth was messier. Both, he finally admitted. "I'm proud of what she's built, and I'm angry that I'm not part of it. At least you're honest. Now work on getting to a place where you can be proud without the anger, where you can want good things for her, independent of whether those things include you." The call ended. Tyson sat in his apartment and thought about what Dr. Brennan had said. Could he genuinely celebrate Grace's success, knowing he'd never be part of it again? Could he let go of the resentment that she was thriving while he was barely surviving? He wasn't sure, but he was starting to understand that his feelings weren't Grace's responsibility. She didn't owe him inclusion in her success. She didn't owe him anything. She'd paid her dues during their marriage, had given everything she had, and now she was done giving to him. The foundation grew quickly. Within weeks, Grace had opened satellite offices, hired staff, established partnerships with medical facilities. Her face appeared in more articles, on more panels, at more events. She was becoming a public figure, someone people recognized and respected. She'd also become untouchable. Not just physically distant, but operating in a realm so far above where Tyson existed that reaching her felt impossible. She'd ascended while he'd remained on the ground, and the gap between them widened with every success she achieved. His business continued to shrink. 3 more clients left. His office space became too expensive to maintain, so he downsized to something smaller, cheaper, barely functional. The contrast between his professional collapse and Grace's rise felt like cosmic justice. He'd taken her for granted. Now the universe was showing him exactly what he'd lost. Tyson started seeing the man from the gala around town, at restaurants, at cultural events, always at places he knew Grace frequented. The man was tall, well-dressed, confident in that easy way some people have. He looked like someone who belonged in Grace's new world of success and sophistication. Once, Tyson saw them together at a park, walking side by side, not quite touching but clearly comfortable with each other. Grace laughed at something the man said, and the sound carried across the distance. It was genuine laughter, the kind she used to share with Tyson before he'd stopped making the effort to earn it. The man reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Grace's ear, and she let him. The gesture was intimate, casual, the kind of thing you only allow from someone you trust. Tyson felt something inside him crack at the sight. She'd moved on, really moved on, not just living her life, but opening herself to someone new, someone who probably asked about her day, who noticed when she was tired, who made space for her pain, instead of adding to it. Tyson wanted to hate this man, wanted to find flaws, reasons why he wasn't good enough for Grace. But from everything he could see, the man treated Grace exactly the way Tyson should have. With attention, with care, with the basic respect of actually seeing the person in front of him. He went to therapy and talked about the jealousy, about watching Grace build a new life that didn't include him, about the man who'd stepped into the space Tyson had vacated. "You're grieving," Dr. Brennan said. "Not just the loss of your marriage, but the loss of possibility. You're realizing that Grace isn't going to suddenly recognize your growth and come back. She's genuinely moving forward, and that makes your loss final in a way it wasn't before." How do I stop feeling like this? You don't stop. You just learn to live with it. You acknowledge that you made choices that led here, and those choices have permanent consequences. You accept that Grace deserves happiness, even if that happiness doesn't include you. And you work on becoming someone who can wish her well without expecting anything in return. It sounded impossible, but so did surviving the divorce, and he'd managed that. Maybe this was just the next impossible thing he had to figure out. Tyson went home and looked at photos from their marriage. Grace smiling at their wedding, Grace on their honeymoon, Grace at family gatherings. In every photo she looked happy, but now he could see what he'd missed before, the effort behind that happiness, the performance of contentment, the careful construction of a woman who'd learned to hide her struggles. She'd been dying slowly in their marriage, and he'd never noticed because she'd made her dying look beautiful. And now she'd learned to live loudly, powerfully, unapologetically. She'd become the woman she should have been all along. And Tyson had to accept that he was never going to be part of that woman's story. Grace had moved beyond revenge. She didn't need to punish him because his own choices had punished him more thoroughly than she ever could. Her success was the ultimate rejection, not of him specifically, but of the life they'd built together. She'd burned that life down and risen from the ashes as someone new, someone extraordinary, someone he'd never deserved. And somewhere in accepting that truth, Tyson felt something shift, not healing exactly, but the beginning of understanding that Grace's story was no longer about him. It was hers alone. And the greatest gift he could give her now was to let her write it without his interference. Chapter 7. The Awakening That Came Too Late. The volunteering started almost by accident. Tyson was scrolling through the Foundation's website late one night, reading testimonials from women Grace's organization had helped. Their stories were raw, painful, familiar in ways that made his chest ache. At the bottom of the page was a volunteer application. Crisis counselor positions available. Training provided. He stared at it for 20 minutes before clicking. The application asked for his name. He hesitated, then typed James Warren Furland, his first and middle names. Technically not a lie, but distant enough from Tyson that maybe he wouldn't be immediately recognized. He listed his contact information, carefully using an email address Grace wouldn't associate with him. Under motivation for volunteering, he wrote simply, "I want to help women who are going through what my ex-wife endured alone." The response came within days. He was invited to a training session. When he arrived at the Foundation's smaller satellite office across town, he realized Grace wouldn't be there. This location was run by staff, not by her directly. He could fly under the radar, at least for a while. The training was intense. They covered crisis intervention, active listening, boundary setting, self-care. The facilitator emphasized that volunteers were not therapists, not fixers, just witnesses. Their job was to hold space for women's pain without trying to solve it. The most powerful thing you can offer someone in crisis is presence, the facilitator said. Just showing up, just listening, just bearing witness to their struggle without judgment or advice unless they ask for it. Tyson thought about all the times Grace must have needed exactly that from him, and he'd offered nothing because he'd never known to ask. He passed the training, was assigned to the crisis hotline, working remote shifts from home. The first call came on a Tuesday evening. "Hello, this is the Voices That Carry Crisis line. My name is James. I'm here to listen." The woman on the other end was crying so hard she could barely speak. When she finally managed words, they tumbled out in a rush. Fourth miscarriage. Husband telling her to just get over it. Family asking when they'd try again. Everyone treating her grief like an inconvenience. "I just want someone to acknowledge that this hurts," she said through tears. "That losing these babies isn't something I can just move past. That I'm allowed to grieve." "Your pain is valid," Tyson said, and he meant it with every molecule of his being. "Losing a pregnancy is losing a child, a future, a hope. You're allowed to grieve as long as you need to. Anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't understand." "How do you know?" "You sound like you understand. Someone I loved went through this 3 times. She never told me. She carried the pain alone because she thought telling me would burden me. I didn't find out until after she'd left me. And I'll regret not being there for her for the rest of my life." The woman was quiet for a moment. "She left you because you didn't support her." "She left me because I was too self-absorbed to notice she was suffering. Because I made our marriage about my comfort instead of her needs. Because I failed her in every way that mattered. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry for me. Be kind to yourself. Tell your husband what you need, even if you're afraid he won't understand. Don't protect him from your pain. That's what she did, and it destroyed her. Don't make her mistake." The call lasted an hour. By the end, the woman had stopped crying. She thanked him, said he'd helped more than he knew. After she hung up, Tyson sat in silence and realized something profound. He couldn't fix what he'd broken with Grace, but maybe he could help other women avoid Grace's fate. Maybe he could be for strangers what he'd failed to be for his wife. The calls kept coming. Different women, same pain. each one a reminder of what Grace had endured. Each conversation a window into the suffering he'd been too blind to see in his own home. Woman whose husband made jokes about her broken body. A woman whose mother-in-law blamed her for not producing grandchildren. A woman who'd spent her savings on treatments while her partner complained about the expense. A woman who was considering leaving her marriage because she couldn't bear feeling like a failure every time she faced her spouse. Tyson listened to all of them, bore witness, offered validation without judgment, and slowly, painfully, he began to understand the scope of what Grace had navigated alone. During his sessions with Dr. Brennan, he talked about the volunteer work. "I think I'm doing this for the right reasons now," he said. "At first it was about Grace, about understanding her. But now it's about them, these women who are suffering. I want to help because they deserve support, not because it makes me feel better about failing Grace." "That's growth," Dr. Brennan said. "Real growth. You're learning to act from empathy rather than self-interest. I'm also learning how much Grace protected me. Every call, I hear echoes of what she must have gone through. And I realize she shielded me from all of it because she loved me. Because she thought protecting me was love. And now you understand that wasn't fair to her. Now I understand that love isn't about protection. It's about presence, about being strong enough to face hard things together instead of leaving one person to carry everything alone." The realization was transformative. Tyson had spent his marriage avoiding discomfort, avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding anything that might disrupt his peace. And Grace had enabled that avoidance by taking on all the hard things herself. They'd been complicit in building a dynamic where he remained comfortable and she remained burdened. And when that burden finally became too heavy, when she needed him most, he'd failed her because he'd never learned how to show up when things got hard. He couldn't change the past, but he could change how he showed up now. For these strangers on the hotline, for himself, for whatever future relationships he might have. One night, a familiar voice came through the line. Not Grace, but someone who knew her. "Hello, voices that carry. This is James." "James, it's Simone." Tyson's sister. His heart stopped. He should have hung up, should have transferred her to another counselor. But something kept him on the line. "Simone, does Grace know you're calling?" "No. And you're not supposed to be volunteering here." "Does she know?" "She knows there's a volunteer named James. She doesn't know James is me." "You're unbelievable. You couldn't respect her boundaries in marriage, and you can't respect them now." "I'm not here for her. I'm here for the women who call. Women like her. Women who need support. I'm just trying to do something useful with my guilt." Simone was quiet for a long moment. "Are you any good at it?" "The counseling?" "I'd like to think so. I listen, I validate. I don't try to fix or minimize. I just hold space for their pain. That's more than you ever did for Grace." "I know. That's why I'm here." Another pause. "I was calling because I'm struggling. Fertility issues of my own. Watching Grace build this foundation while going through my own nightmare it's been a lot." Tyson shifted into counselor mode. "Tell me what you're experiencing." For the next hour, Simone talked about her struggles, her fears, her frustration with a husband who meant well but didn't understand. And Tyson listened the way he should have listened to Grace, with full attention, with empathy, with presence. When the call ended, Simone said something that shocked him. "Thank you. That actually helped. Maybe you're learning after all. Maybe too late for it to matter to the person who needed it most. Yeah, too late for that, but not too late to be better going forward." She hung up. Tyson sat with the realization that his own sister had needed support and had felt comfortable enough to call a crisis line rather than ask him directly. That's how thoroughly he'd burned his family's trust. But she'd let him help her. Anonymously, with no expectation of relationship repair, she'd accepted his support. That had to count for something. The months passed. Tyson continued volunteering, continued therapy, continued the slow, painful work of becoming a different person. He started to notice changes. He was quicker to listen now, slower to assume, more willing to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. He ran into Grace's friend at a grocery store, the woman who'd slapped him after the divorce. She recognized him immediately, and he braced for another confrontation. Instead, she just looked at him. "You look different. I'm trying to be different. Grace is happy. In case you were wondering." "Actually happy." "Not performing happy. I'm glad. She deserves that." "She does. More than you ever gave her." The woman paused. "But I've heard about the volunteer work. Heard you're good at it. So maybe you're learning something." "I'm trying." She nodded and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hostility either. It was acknowledgement that he was trying, and that trying mattered, even if it couldn't repair the past. That night, Tyson sat in his apartment and realized something crucial. He wasn't volunteering to win Grace back anymore. He wasn't doing therapy to prove he'd changed. He was doing these things because they were right. Because he wanted to be someone who helped rather than hurt. Because becoming better was its own reward, independent of whether anyone noticed or cared. Grace had moved on. She'd built a life and a legacy and found happiness without him. And for the first time since the divorce, Tyson found he could think about that without drowning in jealousy or self-pity. He was genuinely glad she was happy, genuinely proud of what she'd built. And if he never got to tell her that, if she lived the rest of her life never knowing he'd learned these lessons, that was okay. The lessons weren't for her benefit. They were for his. And that understanding, more than anything else, meant he might actually be growing into someone different, someone better. Someone who understood that love wasn't about possession or redemption. It was about wanting good things for people, independent of whether those things included you. Too late for Grace, but not too late for whoever came next. Not too late for the women on the crisis line who needed presence instead of promises. Not too late to matter. Chapter 8. The Convergence of Old Wounds and New Truths. The holiday season arrived with its usual demands. Tyson received no invitation to Thanksgiving. He'd expected that. What he hadn't expected was the text from his father. Volunteering at the downtown shelter tomorrow. Food drive. Could use extra hands if you're available. Grace will be there. Tyson stared at the message. His father was extending an olive branch, but with full disclosure that Grace's presence was part of the package. No tricks, no ambushes. Just an honest offer. He responded, "I'll be there." The shelter was chaos when he arrived early Thanksgiving morning. Volunteers everywhere, boxes of food stacked high, families already forming lines outside. He spotted his father immediately, directing traffic with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Warren saw him, nodded once, and pointed to a stack of boxes. "Those need to go into the distribution area. Follow me." They worked in silence for 20 minutes, hauling boxes and organizing supplies. It was the most time Tyson had spent with his father since the divorce. "I've been hearing things," Warren finally said, "about the volunteer work you've been doing. How did you find out?" Grace figured it out. "Your sister called the crisis line, recognized your voice despite the different name. She told Grace." Tyson's stomach dropped. "Is Grace angry?" "Don't know. She hasn't said much about it. But she hasn't tried to get you removed from the program either. Make of that what you will." Before Tyson could respond, Grace walked in. She wore jeans and a foundation t-shirt, her hair pulled back, looking beautiful in her practicality. Their eyes met across the room. She didn't smile, didn't frown, just acknowledged his presence with a slight nod, before turning to greet other volunteers. For the next several hours, they worked in the same space. Not together, but not avoiding each other either. They existed in parallel, helping distribute food to families who needed it, making small talk with people in line, doing the work without the drama. Tyson caught Grace watching him once. He was kneeling down, talking to a little girl who was shy about picking out a toy from the donation box. Grace's expression was unreadable. Then someone asked her a question, and the moment passed. By mid-afternoon, most of the crowd had dispersed. The volunteers began cleaning up. Tyson found himself near Grace, both of them breaking down cardboard boxes. "Thank you for not kicking me out of the program," he said quietly. Grace didn't look at him. "I considered it. But your supervisor says you're good at the work. The women you help don't deserve to lose support because of our history. I'm not doing it to get close to you. I know. That's why you're still there." She paused in her box breaking. "Why are you doing it?" "Because I need to understand what you went through. Because helping other women helps me become someone who wouldn't fail them the way I failed you. Because it's the only meaningful thing I've done in the last year." Grace looked at him then. Really looked at him. "You look different." "I'm trying to be different. Why now? Why not during our marriage?" "Because I didn't know I needed to change. I thought I was fine, that we were fine, that your silence meant contentment instead of suffering. I was wrong about everything." "Yes, you were." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like truth spoken plainly. Grace wasn't trying to wound him. She was just being honest. "I saw you with someone," Tyson said. "At the gala, at the park. It looks like you're happy." Grace set down the box she'd been folding. "I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. Not pretending, not performing, just genuinely content with my life." "Is he good to you?" "He asks about my day. He notices when I'm tired. He offers to help instead of waiting to be asked. He treats me like a partner instead of a convenience." Grace's voice was matter-of-fact. "He does all the things you should have done, and I don't have to teach him. He just knows." Each word was a knife, but Tyson accepted them. "I'm glad. You deserve that." "Do you mean that?" "Yes, I spent a year being jealous, being angry that someone else gets what I had. But I've realized I never actually had you." "Not really. I had your service, your accommodation, your performance of contentment. But I never had your genuine partnership because I never earned it." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me since the divorce. I'm trying to be honest now, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't serve me. It's part of becoming someone different. Is it working? Are you different? I don't know. I'm trying. That's all I can promise. I'm trying to be someone who notices pain instead of ignoring it. Who shows up instead of retreating. Who values presence over comfort. Whether that's different enough, whether it's too late, I can't control that. I can only control the work I'm doing." Grace studied him. "The women you counsel, do you tell them about me?" "Sometimes. When it's relevant. When they're protecting someone who doesn't deserve protection. I tell them what protecting others at your own expense costs. I tell them not to make your mistake." "My mistake?" "Loving someone more than you loved yourself. Carrying pain alone. Thinking silence was strength. Those were mistakes, Grace. Noble mistakes, maybe. But mistakes nonetheless." Grace's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare blame me for—" "I'm not blaming you. I'm saying we were both wrong. You for hiding your suffering, me for not looking hard enough to see it anyway. We built a dynamic where you gave everything and I took everything, and we both participated in that imbalance. You by being too afraid to ask for what you needed, me by being too comfortable to notice you weren't getting it. So now I'm responsible for my own abandonment? No, I'm responsible for failing you. You're responsible for not telling me I was failing you. Both things can be true." Grace picked up another box, breaking it down with more force than necessary. "I shouldn't have had to tell you. You should have seen. You're right. I should have. But you also should have given me the chance to see by telling me what you were going through, by trusting me with your pain instead of deciding I couldn't handle it. We failed each other, Grace, in different ways for different reasons, but we both contributed to the collapse. Don't do this. Don't make this about shared responsibility when you're the one who sat silent for 17 seconds. You're right about that too. Those 17 seconds were all me, my failure, my ego, my destruction. But the 4 years before that, the years where you suffered alone and never told me, that wasn't all my fault. Some of that was your choice to protect me instead of including me." Grace threw the box she was holding. It didn't go far, just flopped a few feet away. But the gesture conveyed her frustration. You're unbelievable. A year of therapy, and you've decided to make yourself the victim. I'm not the victim, you are. But victims can still make choices that hurt themselves. And choosing to suffer in silence instead of demanding support was a choice that hurt you. I'm not excusing my failure. I'm saying we both made choices that destroyed our marriage. Mine were worse. Mine were inexcusable. But yours weren't helpful either. Grace stared at him with something between fury and grudging acknowledgement. I hate that you have a point. I know. I hate it too. It would be easier if I was just the villain and you were just the victim. But relationships are messier than that. We're both flawed people who brought our damage into a marriage and hoped love would be enough to fix it. It wasn't. Love should have been enough. Maybe, but love without communication, without honesty, without willingness to be vulnerable, that's not really love. That's two people coexisting and calling it partnership. Grace picked up the box she'd thrown, smoothing it out unnecessarily. When did you become so insightful? When I lost you. When I had nothing left but time to think about where we went wrong. When therapy stopped being about winning you back and started being about understanding myself. And what do you understand now? That I was a terrible husband, that you deserved better, that I'm trying to become the better you deserved, and that even if I succeed, even if I become someone worthy of partnership, you're never going to give me another chance. Because some failures are too big to forgive. Because you've moved on to someone who doesn't need to learn basic decency. Because I had my shot and I blew it spectacularly. Grace's expression softened slightly. You're right. I'm not giving you another chance. I know. I'm not asking for one. Then what are you asking for? Nothing. I'm not asking for anything. I'm just trying to become better. Whether you ever know or care is irrelevant. They stood in the near-empty shelter, surrounded by broken-down boxes and the remnants of feeding people who had nothing. Grace looked at him with eyes that held too many emotions to name. I don't know what to do with this, she finally said. With you being different. It would be easier if you stayed the same, if you stayed the villain. But you're making it complicated. I'm sorry. I don't mean to complicate things. Yes, you do. You're complicating them by growing, by changing, by making me wonder if the man I married could have become this man if I'd handled things differently. Don't do that. Don't take responsibility for my growth. I should have grown during our marriage. I should have been this person when it mattered. The fact that I'm learning now doesn't mean you failed. It means I finally faced consequences severe enough to force change. Grace wiped her eyes quickly. I need to go. This is too much. She walked toward the exit. Tyson watched her go, then called out, Grace! She stopped but didn't turn around. I hope he makes you happy. Really, truly happy. Not the performed happiness you gave me. The real thing. You deserve the real thing. Grace turned her head slightly, not quite looking at him. He does make me happy. And that's why I can't let you complicate it. I finally have what I need. I can't risk it by entertaining what-ifs about you. I'm not asking you to. I'm just saying I'm glad you found it. She left without responding. Tyson finished breaking down boxes alone, and when his father came back to check on progress, Warren found him sitting on the floor surrounded by cardboard. That looked intense. It was honest. That's different than intense. She's right to move on. You know that. I do. Doesn't make it hurt less. But I'd rather her be happy with someone else than miserable with me. That's growth, right? Warren sat down next to his son. That's growth. Painful growth, but growth nonetheless. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Tyson realized it was the first peaceful moment he'd shared with his father since the divorce. Small progress, but progress. Chapter 9. The Crisis That Revealed Everything. The call came at 2 a.m. Simone's voice was panicked, barely coherent. Dad, hospital heart attack. Come now. Tyson was in his car before he'd fully processed the words. His mind raced through worst-case scenarios during the drive. Warren Furland was strong, healthy for his age, but hearts didn't care about strength. Hearts just stopped sometimes. The hospital waiting room was harsh fluorescent light and uncomfortable plastic chairs. His family was already there. Simone pacing. Garrett on his phone coordinating with relatives. His mother, Delilah, sitting perfectly still, which was somehow more frightening than if she'd been crying. And Grace was there, sitting next to Delilah, holding his mother's hand. Tyson's first instinct was to question her presence. Then he remembered Grace was part of this family in ways he'd forfeited. She had every right to be here. More right than he did, given how she'd shown up for them while he'd been self-absorbed. Delilah saw him first. She didn't stand, didn't reach for him, just acknowledged his presence with a nod. Grace looked up, her face drawn with worry. Their eyes met, and for a moment the complicated history between them didn't matter. They were just two people who loved the same man, hoping he'd survive the night. "What happened?" Tyson asked. Garrett answered. "He collapsed at home. Mom called emergency services. They think it's a major coronary event. He's in surgery now. How long has he been in there?" 3 hours. 3 hours. 3 hours of not knowing, of waiting, of hoping surgery could fix what had broken inside Warren's chest. Tyson sat in a chair away from the group, giving them space. Grace got up, walked to the coffee machine, came back with cups for everyone. She handed one to Tyson without comment. Just a small gesture of humanity in an inhuman situation. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded and returned to Delilah's side. The hours crawled. Somewhere around hour 4, Garrett stood abruptly and walked outside. Tyson found him leaning against the building, face buried in his hands. "He taught me to drive in that old pickup," Garrett said without looking up. "Took me to the empty parking lot behind the high school. Let me stall out 50 times without getting frustrated. Just kept saying, 'Try again, son.' Patient with everything except quitting." Tyson leaned against the wall beside his brother. "He taught me to throw a baseball. Spent hours in the backyard. My aim was terrible. Broke 3 windows over 2 summers. He never complained. Just said better aim means stronger character. We don't deserve him. No, we don't. But maybe that's the point. Love isn't about deserving." They stood together in the pre-dawn darkness. 2 brothers connected by fear and memory. And when they went back inside, something between them had softened. Simone finally exhausted herself and fell asleep across 3 chairs. Garrett dozed sitting up. Delilah remained rigid, refusing to rest. And Grace stayed awake with her, talking quietly, offering what comfort she could. A nurse came through with updates that weren't really updates. Surgery progressing, doctors working. No news yet. The non-information somehow made the waiting worse. Around hour 6, just Grace and Tyson were fully awake. The others had surrendered to exhaustion. Grace got up to stretch her legs, walked to the windows overlooking the parking lot. Tyson joined her, maintaining respectful distance. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Yes, I did. Your father sat with me in this same hospital when I lost my 2nd pregnancy. I called him instead of you because I couldn't face your questions. He drove across town at 3 in the morning, sat in the waiting room for hours, never asked for details, just stayed. I owe him this." Tyson absorbed this information. "I never knew he did that. There's a lot you didn't know. A lot I didn't tell you. I'm starting to realize my silence was as damaging as your obliviousness. What changed? Why are you realizing that now?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "Therapy, relationship with someone new, distance from our marriage. All of it together made me see that I wasn't blameless. I chose to suffer alone. I chose not to give you the chance to support me. I decided you couldn't handle it without ever testing that theory. That wasn't fair to either of us. I wouldn't have handled it well. We both know that. Maybe, maybe not, but I didn't give you the chance to try. I just assumed you'd fail and protected myself accordingly. That's not partnership. That's self-sabotage disguised as nobility." They stood together looking out at the dark parking lot, and Tyson felt the weight of parallel realizations. Both of them had failed their marriage. Both of them had learned too late what they should have known during. "Are you still with him?" Tyson asked. "The man from the gala?" "No, we ended things." Something in Tyson's chest lightened, and he immediately felt guilty for it. "What happened?" "He was perfect. Attentive, communicative, everything I thought I wanted. But I kept comparing him to you. Kept thinking about whether the man you're becoming could have been the man I married if I'd been braver about asking for what I needed. Grace, let me finish. I'm not saying we should try again. I'm saying I realized I wasn't being fair to him. I was using him as a shield against dealing with unresolved feelings about our marriage. About you. About who I was during those years and who I've become since. He deserved someone fully present, and I couldn't give him that. Because of me. Because of me. Because I haven't forgiven myself for staying as long as I did. For making myself small. For thinking love meant accommodation instead of honesty. You failed me. But I also failed myself. And I need to make peace with that before I can be with anyone. Tyson didn't know what to say. The woman standing next to him was someone new. Someone he recognized but didn't know. Grace had evolved beyond the person he'd married, beyond the person he'd failed. She'd become someone capable of owning her part in their dysfunction, and that made her simultaneously more admirable and more distant. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," he finally said. "You deserve peace. So do you. That's the thing I'm learning. You don't have to be perfect to deserve peace. You just have to be trying." They returned to silence. Comfortable silence, not tense. Two people who'd shared history, learning to exist in the aftermath of that history. An elderly couple entered the waiting room, holding each other like anchors in a storm. The woman was crying softly. Her husband guided her to chairs, never letting go of her hand. They sat pressed together, unified in whatever crisis had brought them here. Grace watched them, something shifting in her expression. "That's what I thought we'd become. Growing old together, holding each other through the hard things. We could have been that." "No, we couldn't, because I was always holding myself through the hard things. You were just there, present in body but absent in attention. That couple? They're both holding each other. That's the difference." Tyson had no response to that truth. The surgeon emerged around dawn. Tired but satisfied, Warren had survived. The damage was significant but repairable. He'd need extensive recovery, lifestyle changes, monitoring. But he'd live. Delilah broke. Just completely fell apart. Grace caught her, held her through the storm of relief and residual terror. Simone and Garrett woke up, joined the embrace. Tyson stood apart, watching his family hold each other, and Grace was at the center of it. When Delilah finally pulled herself together, she turned to Tyson. "You should see him when they let us in. You should see your father." "Are you sure?" "He asked for you. Said if something happened to him, he needed you to know he wasn't disappointed anymore. That he'd heard about the volunteer work, about the changes. That he was proud you were trying." The words broke something in Tyson. He turned away, shoulders shaking, trying to hold it together. Grace appeared beside him, not touching, just present. "It's okay," she said quietly. "You're allowed to feel things. He's proud of me. After everything, he's proud. He loves you. That never changed. He was just disappointed. But love and disappointment can coexist. You're learning that now." They were allowed in to see Warren in small groups. Tyson went with his mother. His father looked small in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that made Tyson's throat tight. But Warren's eyes were clear when they opened. "Boy, hey Dad, you scared us. Scared myself. Thought I was done." Warren's voice was weak but steady. "Glad I'm not. Too much left to do. You need to rest. Focus on recovery." "I will. But first, need to say something." Warren's hand reached out. Tyson took it. "I'm proud of you. The man you're becoming. It's who you should have been all along. But better late than never. Dad, let me finish. Grace told me about the volunteer work. About how you helped those women. That matters. What you did to her was unforgivable. But what you're doing now is honorable. Both things are true. You were terrible. You're becoming better. I can be disappointed in who you were and proud of who you're trying to be. That's what love is." Tyson couldn't speak through the tears. His father squeezed his hand once, then closed his eyes to rest. Over the next week, the family took shifts at the hospital. Grace was there more than anyone except Delilah. She brought food, ran errands, made sure everyone was taking care of themselves while they cared for Warren. She became the glue holding them together. Tyson and Grace ended up on the same shift 3 times. They talked, real conversations about real things. About the marriage, about their failures, about what they'd learned, about where they were now. "I've been thinking," Grace said during the 3rd shift, "about forgiveness. My therapist asked me if I'd forgiven you. I said yes, I did that months ago. But then she asked if forgiving you meant I'd released my anger or just buried it under achievement. I didn't have a good answer. What's your answer now?" "I don't know. Some days I think I've let it go. Other days I'm still furious. At you for failing me. At myself for allowing it. At the whole situation for being so much more complicated than villain and victim. You're allowed to stay angry." "I don't want to. Anger is exhausting. I've built an empire on anger, helped hundreds of women through anger. But I'm tired of carrying it. I want to put it down. What's stopping you?" Grace looked at him directly. "Fear. If I let go of anger, what do I have left? If I'm not the woman you wronged, who am I? You're the woman who survived being wronged and built something beautiful from the rubble. The anger helped you survive, but maybe you don't need it anymore to thrive. When did you get wise? When I had nothing left but time to think. Wisdom is what happens when you've destroyed everything and have to figure out why." Grace almost smiled. "I can't give you another chance. You understand that, right?" "I know. I'm not asking for one. But I can give you honesty. And honesty is, I don't hate you anymore. I don't even really blame you anymore. I'm just tired of letting what happened define me. I want to move forward without carrying you, the memory of you, the anger at you, the what-ifs about you, everywhere I go." "Then do that. Release me. Not for my sake, for yours. Is it really that simple?" "I don't know. But maybe it starts with deciding it is." When Warren was finally released from the hospital, there was a small gathering at Delilah and Warren's house, just family. Tyson was invited without caveats, without conditions. He showed up with flowers for his mother and a book about woodworking for his father. Grace was there. They existed in the same space without tension, without drama. Just 2 people who shared history and were learning to let that history rest. As the evening wound down, Grace pulled Tyson aside. "I'm going to stop looking for you to fail. I'm going to start believing you might actually become someone different. That doesn't mean we'll be friends. It doesn't mean anything except I'm releasing the narrative where you're frozen as the man who failed me. You're allowed to evolve, and I'm allowed to notice without it threatening the peace I've built. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me, because holding on to anger about who you were prevents me from becoming who I want to be." She left shortly after. Tyson watched her go and understood that this was the closest thing to peace they'd ever have. Not reconciliation, not friendship, just release, just letting go of the story where they were locked in eternal roles of villain and victim. It was enough. It had to be. Chapter 10. The Architecture of Silence, Rebuilding from Ruins. The coffee shop was neutral territory. Grace had suggested it, which meant something had shifted. She'd reached out first, asked to meet, not to talk about the divorce or the past, just to talk. Tyson arrived early, ordered nothing, waited. When Grace walked in, she looked different, lighter somehow. Like she'd finally put down a weight she'd been carrying. They sat across from each other. 2 people who used to know everything about each other. Now strangers learning the basics. "Thank you for coming," Grace said. "Thank you for asking." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people gathering their thoughts. Grace spoke first. "I've been thinking about that night. The restaurant, your silence. I've replayed it thousands of times, trying to understand what happened in those 17 seconds. Grace, we don't have to. I need to say this. I counted those seconds because I was giving you chances. Chance after chance to choose me. And when you didn't, I decided that meant you didn't love me. But I'm realizing now it was more complicated than that. It wasn't complicated. I failed you. You did. But I also set you up to fail by never telling you what I needed. By never asking you to fight for me before that moment. By expecting you to read my mind and then being devastated when you couldn't. Tyson shook his head. Don't do this. Don't take responsibility for my failure. I'm not. I'm taking responsibility for mine. For years of silence. For protecting you instead of trusting you. For building walls and then resenting you for not breaking them down. Grace's voice was steady. You were a terrible husband, but I was a terrible wife too. Just in different ways. You were never terrible. I was silent. I hid my pain. I made myself small and blamed you for not making me big again. That's terrible in its own way. They sat with that truth. I forgive you, Grace said. Really forgive you. Not the theoretical forgiveness I claimed months ago. Real release. You hurt me. You failed me. And I forgive you anyway. Not because you earned it. Because I need to let it go. I don't know what to say. Say you forgive yourself. Because I think that's the harder work. Tyson felt tears prick his eyes. I don't know if I can. Then start trying. You've become someone different. The volunteer work, the therapy, the way you showed up for my dad, all of it matters. You're not the man I divorced, and holding on to guilt about who you were prevents you from becoming fully who you are. Are you asking me to forgive myself so you can move on? I'm asking you to forgive yourself so we both can. They talked for 2 hours. Not about reconciliation, not about second chances, just about the people they'd been and the people they'd become. About the marriage that failed and what they'd learned from that failure. Can I ask you something? Tyson said. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd had this honesty during our marriage? Every day. But I'm learning that wondering doesn't change anything. We can't go back. We can only go forward. Forward as what? Grace considered. As people who knew each other once, who hurt each other badly, who learned from that hurt, maybe eventually as friends, but not now. Now we're just two people releasing each other from the story we were trapped in. That feels right. It does. Grace stood to leave. Tyson stood too. They faced each other across the table, and everything that had been broken between them felt somehow lighter. Goodbye, Tyson. Goodbye, Grace. She walked out of the coffee shop, and Tyson understood this was the real ending, not the dramatic exit from the restaurant, not the divorce papers, this quiet moment where they chose to let each other go. He sat back down and stared at his untouched coffee. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Sunday dinner next week. You're invited. Grace will be there too. If you can both handle it. Tyson responded, I'll be there. The silence that had destroyed them was finally breaking. Not with noise, not with drama, just with the slow, steady work of two people learning to exist in the same world without destroying each other. Grace had built an architecture of silence during their marriage, a structure designed to protect him at her own expense. And when that structure collapsed, she'd built something new from the ruins, something stronger, something that didn't require her to be small. Tyson had learned to notice silence now, to ask questions when things seemed too quiet, to show up instead of assuming everything was fine. He'd become someone who understood that presence mattered more than comfort, that love was action rather than feeling. The partnership required work he'd never been willing to do before. Too late for Grace, but not too late to matter. He finished his coffee and walked out into afternoon sun. The day was bright, clear, full of possibility. His life stretched ahead of him, smaller than before, humbler than before, but his own. He'd lost everything and survived the loss. He'd become someone different through that survival, and somewhere across town, Grace was living her life fully, building her empire, helping women find their voices. She was extraordinary, and he'd had the chance to appreciate that extraordinariness and had wasted it. But she was free now. Free from his failure, free from his silence, free to be who she'd always been underneath the accommodation and protection. And Tyson was free too. free from the guilt of not knowing who he'd failed, free to become someone who wouldn't fail that way again, free to matter in small ways, to women on crisis lines, to his family, to himself. The silence had destroyed them. But in that destruction, they'd both found truth. Grace learned she deserved to be chosen. Tyson learned he'd never really chosen her at all. Some lessons come too late to save what they were meant to protect. But they still matter. They still change everything that comes after. And that was enough. It had to be.